The world in January 1939 was teetering on the edge of a conflict that few wanted to confront, yet all sense was inevitable. Berlin, the capital of the Third Reich, buzzed with a mechanical rhythm of preparation. From the Reich Chancellery, Hitler surveyed detailed maps that sprawled across his polished desk, marking borders, towns, and logistical choke points. He consulted with generals like Walther von Brauchitsch and Heinrich Himmler, outlining his belief that France and Britain, haunted by the scars of World War I, would hesitate to take military action. "They fear the ghosts of the past," Hitler said, his voice calm, almost meditative, "and that fear will be our shield." Outside the Chancellery, the streets of Berlin were filled with citizens who admired the precision and discipline of the army, unaware that these maneuvers were more than parades. They were the first steps toward war. Hitler's confidence was grounded not in arrogance alone, but in a calculated reading of Europe's political and psychological weaknesses, where hesitancy was as lethal as any weapon. In London, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain was maneuvering carefully through a web of diplomacy, desperately trying to maintain a fragile peace. By March 1939, he had convened meetings with French and British ministers to discuss Germany's aggressive moves in Central Europe. Chamberlain's famous approach of appeasement was not naive optimism. It was rooted in fear of repeating the carnage of the previous war, coupled with a hope that Hitler could be satisfied with minor territorial gains. "We cannot allow Europe to collapse into chaos," Chamberlain confided to his private secretary, yet intelligence from the British embassy in Berlin suggested otherwise. Hitler was preparing a lightning strike, confident that Europe's indecision and lingering pacifism would ensure Germany faced minimal resistance. Reports described the German army as meticulously trained, strategically positioned, and psychologically prepared to exploit hesitation, and Chamberlain's advisors felt an unease that grew heavier with each passing day. Meanwhile, in Paris, Édouard Daladier and his generals relied heavily on the Maginot Line, a massive network of fortifications along the French-German border, believing it would deter any German attack. The French High Command felt secure in their concrete defenses, confident that Hitler would not risk a direct assault through heavily fortified territory. Yet intelligence from the eastern frontier, including unexpected German troop movements and early reconnaissance flights over Poland and Czechoslovakia, suggested otherwise. Officers debated quietly whether the reports were exaggerations or preparatory exercises, but the fear of mobilizing prematurely, which had alarmed the public and weakened political support, held them back. Across Europe, hesitation became a subtle form of vulnerability that Hitler could exploit with devastating effect. Hitler himself in Berlin observed and calculated with precision. He had already assessed the fractured alliances and political fatigue that plagued Britain, France, and smaller nations. By July 1939, he wrote to his foreign minister Joachim von Ribbentrop, "Our moment is now. They will speak, they will protest, but they will not act decisively." His generals, including Fedor von Bock and Gerd von Rundstedt, understood that he was gambling, but few dared to challenge his assessment openly. Hitler had meticulously prepared a plan for a swift and crushing strike against Poland, one that would combine speed, surprise, and overwhelming force. The German army's mechanized divisions, supported by the Luftwaffe's dominance in the skies, were ready to implement blitzkrieg tactics that would redefine warfare forever, striking fear into nations unprepared for modern mechanized assault. In the Luftwaffe headquarters, Hermann Göring studied aerial reconnaissance photographs and flight plans. The German air fleet was poised to neutralize Polish infrastructure, bridges, and railways within hours of the invasion. Göring turned to his aides and remarked, "Speed is our ally. Hesitation will be theirs. Inaction is a weapon we will exploit." Soldiers, pilots, and tank crews drilled relentlessly, and the German people, largely unaware of the imminence of war, took pride in the seeming efficiency of their military, seeing it as an emblem of national revival. Meanwhile, European diplomats and intelligence officers struggled to interpret these signs, often underestimating both the audacity and speed of Hitler's intentions, giving him the advantage even before a single shot was fired. Across the English Channel, British intelligence reported daily movements of German troops. Sir Hugh Sinclair, head of MI6, documented the growing German mobilization and warned that Poland could be attacked at any moment. "All indications point to imminent action," he wrote in late August. Yet our leaders are paralyzed by the memory of the last war. Chamberlain, desperate to avoid conflict, continued to pursue diplomatic channels, negotiating promises of neutrality, hoping Hitler could be placated. Hitler, however, viewed this caution as validation of his assumptions. Europe was indecisive, weak, and predictable, and he could strike with minimal fear of immediate retaliation. Poland itself braced for conflict. Cities such as Warsaw and Krakow were flooded with soldiers, weapons, and communications equipment, preparing for a war they hoped could be delayed or deterred. Marshal Edward Smigly, commander-in-chief of the Polish armed forces, coordinated defensive plans, fortifying positions along rivers and highways, training troops to hold towns for as long as possible. Civilians stocked supplies, evacuated strategic areas, and followed radio broadcasts filled with updates and propaganda. Fear permeated every aspect of daily life. Yet few fully grasped the speed and ruthlessness of the assault that awaited them, or that Hitler had already coordinated a secret pact with Stalin to divide the country before any European power could intervene. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed secretly in August 1939, guaranteed that the Soviet Union would occupy eastern Poland while Germany attacked from the west. This agreement removed the danger of a two-front war for Hitler at the outset, giving him the confidence to act decisively. In a private meeting with Ribbentrop and Göring, Hitler declared, "We can advance without fear. The world will be too slow to stop us." This calculated boldness, combined with Europe's hesitation and the psychological scars of World War I, formed the foundation of his belief that no one could or would oppose him effectively. In Berlin, Hitler's generals debated the potential risks. Von Bock expressed concerns that France might react, that Britain might declare war. Hitler dismissed them, stating calmly, "They will protest, but they will not act. Their memory of trenches and blood will keep them frozen." This calm confidence, terrifying some officers and inspiring others, demonstrated a unique combination of audacity, strategic foresight, and psychological understanding. Hitler's understanding of European political inertia was as decisive as the tanks, infantry, and planes he was about to unleash. By late August 1939, German forces were fully mobilized. Panzer divisions assembled near the Polish border, Luftwaffe squadrons patrolled the skies, and infantry units moved into pre-assigned positions. Hitler spent hours in maps and briefings, instructing commanders in the details of timing, speed, and coordination. Every general knew that success relied on both the power of machinery and the weakness of Europe's political will. Hitler's calculations were not simply about military strength. They were an understanding of human hesitation, national fear, and the inertia of diplomacy. Polish generals, including Tadeusz Kościuszko, examined maps of their own, plotting defensive lines and strategies to slow the German advance. They understood that time was their only ally, that every delay in the German assault would give them precious hours to regroup. Soldiers fortified towns, prepared counterattacks, and civilians worked tirelessly to support their armies. Families packed belongings. Children learned to hide in cellars, and entire communities braced for the sound of mechanized warfare that was imminent and unstoppable. Across Europe, diplomats debated, leaders hesitated, and Hitler watched, confident that his gamble would succeed. Reports came in from spies and intelligence agents. France hesitated to mobilize fully, Britain delayed any confrontation, and smaller nations, paralyzed by fear and indecision, failed to take strong positions. Hitler's psychological advantage was as lethal as the thousands of tanks and aircraft at his disposal. Europe's fear and delay were becoming an invisible army, marching in tandem with Germany's mechanized forces. On September 1st, 1939, the invasion of Poland began. German divisions moved simultaneously from the west, north, and south. Panzer tanks ripped through forests and plains, Luftwaffe bombers destroyed communication lines, and infantry followed with relentless speed. Polish forces, outnumbered and outgunned, attempted to hold their cities and towns, but the blitzkrieg doctrine moved too fast, too precisely. Civilians ran for cover, soldiers fought bravely in desperate pockets of resistance, and world leaders watched in horror, realizing too late that Hitler had calculated a hesitation of nations into his advantage. By the end of the first day, German forces had taken multiple strategic towns, cut through Polish defenses, and advanced rapidly toward Warsaw. Hitler's belief that no one would stop him had been vindicated by both the weakness and indecision of Europe and by the stunning efficiency of his military machine. The world now faced a reality that a new conflict had begun, one that would consume millions of lives and reshape history forever. Europe's hesitation, Hitler's audacity, and the devastating precision of Blitzkrieg had combined to launch World War II, confirming the terrifying genius of a leader who had bet on human fear as much as military strength. The morning of September 2nd, 1939, dawned over fields and forests of Poland with a silence that belied the chaos already unleashed. German panzer divisions, led by commanders such as Heinz Guderian and Fedor von Bock, had advanced with devastating precision to the western provinces, encountering pockets of resistance that were quickly encircled and neutralized. Warsaw, still unaware of the speed of the approaching armored units, began mobilizing local militias to support retreating Polish soldiers. Civilians fled along crumbling roads, clutching what few possessions they could carry, as the first columns of Luftwaffe bombers streaked across the sky, leaving trails of smoke over bridges and rail stations. Hitler, observing from Berlin, remarked to Julius Schaub, his personal adjutant, "They hesitate, they falter, and we move like lightning. This is how wars are won when the world refuses to act." His voice carried not pride, but chilling calm, a testament to the precision of planning and the psychological exploitation of his enemy's indecision. In Krakow, General Leonard Skierski attempted to organize a defensive line along the Vistula River, sending urgent dispatches to Warsaw requesting reinforcements and air support. Yet the Polish Air Force, though brave, was quickly overwhelmed by the Luftwaffe's superior aircraft. The sight of Messerschmitt swooping low over towns, dropping bombs on communication centers, and strafing retreating columns created panic among both soldiers and civilians. Amid the chaos, soldiers whispered among themselves, "We fight not just the Germans, but the hesitation of our allies," understanding that the absence of immediate support from France or Britain left them dangerously isolated. Each decision, each movement was critical, and every delay compounded the already catastrophic situation. Meanwhile, in Berlin, Hitler convened a council with Göring, Himmler, and Ribbentrop to assess progress. Maps displayed the rapid German advance, with armored divisions cutting through Polish defenses in less than 48 hours. Hitler's belief that no one would stop him seemed justified, but his mind remained calculated and cautious. "Do not celebrate yet," he warned. "Europe may awaken, but not in time to hinder us." His generals nodded, the weight of responsibility heavy. Yet they understood that their leader's insight into human hesitation was as decisive as the tanks and planes at their disposal. Their strategic audacity, combining psychology and military might, would define the early war months and cement Hitler's perception of invincibility. In Paris, Edouard Daladier and his generals studied reports of German movements with growing alarm. The Maginot Line, which had been relied upon as an impenetrable defense, seemed irrelevant as news of the speed of the German advance poured in. French commanders argued heatedly over whether to mobilize forces to support Poland directly, but political indecision paralyzed them. One officer muttered, we wait, yet what if the waiting becomes surrender?" This paralysis, exactly what Hitler had anticipated, underscored the psychological aspect of his strategy. His confidence rested not merely on military strength, but on exploiting the inertia, fear, and exhaustion of Europe's political leaders. On the ground, Polish troops fought valiantly, their bravery underscored by desperation. Colonel Stefan Rowecki, commanding units in western Poland, coordinated counterattacks that temporarily stalled German tanks in towns like Lodz. Soldiers used narrow streets, barricades, and urban defenses to delay mechanized units, creating scenes of intense combat that combined ingenuity with courage. Civilians aided wherever possible, hiding in cellars, supplying food and water, and sending messages between units. Yet for every small victory, German forces responded with overwhelming force, demonstrating the effectiveness of blitzkrieg tactics and reinforcing Hitler's belief that rapid, decisive action combined with enemy hesitation was unstoppable. Across the Channel, British intelligence received reports of the invasion's progress. Sir Hugh Sinclair informed Prime Minister Chamberlain that the speed and coordination of the German forces exceeded every expectation, noting that Polish resistance was courageous but doomed without Allied intervention. "If we delay further," Sinclair warned, "we risk the collapse of Poland before France and Britain can act." Chamberlain, still reluctant to commit to war, ordered further diplomatic negotiations, sending envoys to Berlin in hopes of stalling further escalation. Hitler, however, regarded this as a predictable move, a delay that would serve only to enhance his advantage, reinforcing the pattern of hesitation he had relied upon in his planning. In Warsaw, General Tadeusz Kościuszko coordinated an evacuation of government officials and civilians while attempting to organize a counteroffensive. The streets of the capital were filled with military units preparing defensive positions, makeshift barricades, and hurriedly constructed fortifications. Bombed bridges and craters from Luftwaffe attacks complicated movement, forcing Polish forces to improvise with ingenuity and courage. Soldiers, despite facing overwhelming odds, remained determined to hold positions as long as possible, aware that each hour of resistance bought time for potential Allied intervention. Yet, in their hearts, many knew that European hesitation had already sealed the initial fate of the nation. In Berlin, Hitler reflected on the strategic brilliance of combining speed with psychological warfare. He knew that his advantage was not merely in tanks or aircraft, but in understanding the human element, the fear, indecision, and political fatigue of leaders across Europe. At a dinner meeting with Goebbels and Himmler, he discussed the upcoming stages of the campaign. "They will continue to watch, debate, and hesitate," he noted. "And as they do, our path becomes inevitable. No one will stop us. Not yet. Not now." The room was silent, except for the sound of pens scratching maps and the quiet hum of advisors calculating logistics. Hitler's clarity of vision contrasted sharply with the chaotic reactions in London and Paris. As the German advance continued, stories emerged from the front lines that would later be chronicled in diaries, letters, and intelligence reports. Civilians described towns set ablaze by aerial bombardments. Soldiers recounted desperate last stands in villages like Pietkau-Trybunalski, and officers documented the near-perfect execution of Blitzkrieg. Guderian, in his diary, wrote, "The speed of our advance is beyond expectation. The enemy falters not from fear of our strength, but from hesitation within their command." Hitler's belief that no one could stop him was validated not only by operational success, but by the psychological collapse of his opponents. Meanwhile, in London, Chamberlain and his war cabinet debated the timing of declaring war. On September 3, 1939, British and French leaders, under immense public pressure, finally issued ultimatums to Germany. The decision came too late to prevent the devastation of Poland, and the initial days of the invasion had already cemented German dominance in the region. Hitler, watching events unfold through radio updates and military communiques, remained confident in the efficacy of his plan, convinced that European hesitation had given him the edge he needed to strike decisively. Polish resistance continued in towns and along rivers, where Colonel Rowecki and Brigadier General Julius Rommel attempted to organize retreats and counterattacks. Soldiers fought with desperate ingenuity, often using narrow streets, makeshift barricades, and local terrain to stall panzer divisions. Civilians were caught in the middle, fleeing bombed towns, hiding in forests, and relying on the courage of their neighbors for survival. Letters from soldiers revealed a mixture of bravery, fear, and disbelief that Europe had not intervened earlier. Every moment underscored Hitler's strategic manipulation of hesitation. Speed and surprise combined with enemy inaction were proving devastatingly effective. By mid-September, Polish forces were surrounded in key areas like Warsaw and Modlin Fortress. General R.Y.D.Z. Smigly, realizing that relief from France or Britain would not arrive in time, ordered defensive positions strengthened and communications maintained with both civilian and military units. Soldiers dug trenches, reinforced barricades, and prepared for a brutal urban combat. Reports from these days, later collected in military archives, described the courage of small units in the face of overwhelming mechanized attacks and precision bombing campaigns. Hitler's conviction that no one could stop him was reinforced by the relentless progression of his armies and the hesitancy of Europe's leaders. As September 17, 1939, dawned, the Soviet Union began its invasion from the east under the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, sealing Poland's fate. The Wehrmacht met minimal resistance from the Red Army, whose movements were coordinated secretly with Hitler. In Berlin, this event confirmed Hitler's strategic genius. The timing of operations, the psychological manipulation of hesitant European leaders, and the exploitation of alliances ensured his initial victory was almost complete. Generals in the Reich felt the weight of the moment. Officers like von Bock and Guderian understood that the early war had been shaped not just by military skill, but by the careful orchestration of political inertia and fear. By the end of September, Poland was effectively defeated, and Europe began to realize the magnitude of Hitler's ambition. Civilians across Poland experienced devastation. Families were displaced, and soldiers had been slaughtered or captured. Hitler's early confidence, rooted in an understanding of European hesitation, political fear, and psychological warfare, had been validated. Yet the story of these weeks was more than a military conquest. It was a demonstration of how the indecision and inaction of nations could empower a single leader to strike with nearly unstoppable force. The stage was now set for a much larger conflict, one that would engulf the continent and redefine warfare forever. As September 26, 1939, approached, the remnants of the Polish army retreated toward Warsaw and the eastern strongholds, battered but determined to resist. General R.Y.D.Z. Smigly, now coordinating fragmented units, attempted to hold open supply lines for food, ammunition, and communications, but the constant bombardment by the Luftwaffe and the advance of panzer divisions left towns in ruins. Soldiers, exhausted and dispirited, often fought street by street, barricading buildings and attempting ambushes against mechanized forces that moved with unrelenting precision. Civilians, hiding in cellars and abandoned buildings, could hear the thunder of tanks and the shriek of bombers, each day a terrifying reminder that the war they had feared was now their daily reality. The psychological weight of constant attack, combined with the absence of Allied support, made the situation increasingly desperate. In Berlin, Hitler observed daily reports from his commanders with satisfaction. Heinrich Himmler relayed intelligence on captured Polish officers and civilian leaders, while Guderian detailed the rapid dismantling of organized resistance in Silesia and Pomerania. Hitler's calculation that European hesitation would work in his favor had been validated completely. France and Britain had declared war, but their initial movements were slow, cautious, and largely symbolic. "Their fear is our weapon," Hitler told Göring, "and it will guide us to the next stage. They hesitate, we strike." This mindset, blending strategic foresight with psychological exploitation, underpinned the early successes of the Wehrmacht and further fueled Hitler's sense of invincibility. Meanwhile, in Warsaw, the city's defenses were organized under General Julius Rommel and his staff. Trenches were dug along the Vistula, barricades were reinforced, and civilian population was mobilized to support the military. Soldiers patrolled rooftops to spot German aircraft, while artillery crews prepared for bombardment that would come almost daily. Letters from soldiers to families reveal a mixture of pride and fear, as many knew the army was facing overwhelming odds. Some wrote, "We fight for our home, yet the world watches in silence. Will anyone come to aid us before it is too late?" Their courage contrasted starkly with the indecision of Europe, underscoring Hitler's advantage not just in strategy, but in timing and psychological dominance. German forces pressed relentlessly. On September 27th, the 10th Panzer Division, led by General George Stumm, broke through northern defenses near Modlin Fortress, isolating large pockets of Polish troops. Soldiers defending the area were exhausted from days of continuous combat, yet they held as long as possible, delaying the Germans' progress. Civilians, many of whom had fled from surrounding towns, joined in by carrying supplies, signaling warnings, and helping with medical care. The Luftwaffe bombed strategic bridges and rail lines to prevent reinforcement, showcasing precision of combined arms operations that would later become the hallmark of German military strategy. Hitler's belief that no one would stop him seemed prophetic. The efficiency and coordination of his forces were magnified by the paralysis of Allied powers, who could only observe from afar. In London, the cabinet watched the reports with growing alarm. Winston Churchill, though not yet Prime Minister, had already warned colleagues that Hitler's audacity should not be underestimated. Chamberlain, still clinging to diplomatic hope, hesitated to escalate further. British intelligence suggested sending limited support, but logistical and political delays slowed any real action. Meanwhile, Hitler monitored these hesitations closely, reinforcing the lesson that his strategic advantage lay not only in military power, but in the psychological paralysis of the world watching him act. His generals, including von Brauchitsch and Rundstedt, documented these reports, understanding that the combination of speed, fear, and inaction was shaping one of the most decisive campaigns in modern warfare. Polish cavalry units, under officers like Colonel Julian Filipovich, made heroic charges to slow German motorized columns, aware that their weapons were outdated but motivated by courage and loyalty. In villages such as Czestochowa and Radom, small units of infantry created ambushes in narrow streets, temporarily halting panzer advances. Civilians hid under rubble and in basements, feeding and assisting soldiers whenever possible. These acts of bravery were later recorded in diaries and letters, revealing the extraordinary resilience of ordinary people under siege. Yet the overwhelming might and coordination of the German forces ensured that these heroic stands could only delay the inevitable. By September 28th, German troops had encircled Warsaw completely. Cut off from reinforcements and surrounded by mechanized divisions, Polish forces made their last stands in the city's fortified districts. Snipers fired from rooftops, artillery crews targeted advancing armor, and barricades were continuously reinforced by soldiers and civilians alike. The psychological strain was immense. Children hid from the roar of tanks, mothers prayed in shattered churches, and soldiers held their positions knowing that capture or death was imminent. Hitler, observing reports from Berlin, remarked calmly, "Their courage is admirable, but courage alone cannot stop the inevitable." In the Eastern Territories, Soviet forces moved with precise coordination, occupying Lwów, Vilnius, and other key cities, according to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Polish commanders faced a horror of being attacked from both west and east, their strategic options collapsing. Civilians experienced the dual terror of bombings from the Luftwaffe and the advancing Red Army, creating a profound sense of helplessness. Historical accounts reveal that soldiers wrote in diaries about confusion, betrayal, and exhaustion, illustrating how the simultaneous actions of two powerful forces crushed resistance and validated Hitler's belief that no one could effectively intervene. Throughout Berlin, Hitler's inner circle was focused on consolidating gains. Göring celebrated the rapid advancement of air power, while Himmler assessed the captured Polish territories for security and administration. Hitler himself met with von Bock and Guderian, discussing the next steps, securing supply lines, preparing for political administration, and ensuring that Polish forces could not regroup. His confidence was rooted in a combination of military genius and the inaction of Europe. Each day's reports reinforce his belief. Hesitation and fear in foreign capitals had become as effective as German tanks, aircraft, and infantry. By September 29th, Warsaw endured continuous bombardment. Civilians sheltered in the sewers and underground shelters. Soldiers organized desperate counterattacks, and city leaders attempted negotiations with German commanders to protect civilians. Despite the bravery of defenders, the Wehrmacht's mechanized and air superiority rendered Polish efforts increasingly futile. Letters from officers reveal both pride and resistance, and despair at the lack of external support. Hitler, watching these events unfold, saw his strategy validated. Europe's initial indecision had allowed him to strike swiftly, decisively, and with overwhelming force. In the outer districts of Warsaw, urban combat intensified. Soldiers, such as those under Lieutenant Colonel Ladislaw Anders, fought street by street, sometimes using improvised explosives and barricades to halt German advances. Civilians risked their lives to carry messages and supplies, blending courage with desperation. The chaos of urban warfare demonstrated the determination of the Polish people and army, yet the precision and coordination of German forces ensured that resistance would ultimately fail. Hitler's assessment that no one would stop him at the outset was repeatedly confirmed in these brutal, day-to-day engagements. By the first days of October, Warsaw's defenders were exhausted. Food, ammunition, and medical supplies ran low. Civilians struggled to survive, facing constant bombardment, fires, and the destruction of essential infrastructure. Officers like Rommel made final tactical decisions to prolong resistance as long as possible, hoping that France or Britain might take stronger action. The historical record shows remarkable heroism in these final stands, but the weight of German strategy, timing, and coordination was overwhelming. Hitler's calculated gamble had succeeded. Hesitation, fear, and delayed response by Europe allowed him to execute a near-perfect campaign in the opening weeks of the war. On October 5, 1939, Warsaw surrendered. Soldiers marched out of captivity. Civilians faced occupation, and the first chapter of World War II had been written in blood, fire, and strategy. Hitler's belief that no one could stop him had been validated both by operational execution and by the paralysis of European powers. The fall of Poland was not only a military victory, it was a psychological triumph, demonstrating the deadly combination of preparation, speed, and exploiting the hesitation of others. Generals, civilians, and historians alike would later reflect on these events as a chilling illustration of how indecision and fear can enable catastrophic outcomes. As the smoke cleared over Warsaw and the surrounding territories, questions began to emerge across Europe and within occupied Poland. Could the Allies have acted sooner? Was the failure of diplomacy more costly than the failure of armies? How much of Hitler's early success relied on his understanding of human hesitation rather than sheer military might? What lessons could soldiers, civilians, and commanders learn about preparation, courage, and the cost of indecision? How does fear shape decision-making at the highest levels of command? Could Europe have prevented the bloodshed if it had acted differently? These questions lingered in conversations, letters, and historical analyses, ensuring that the story of 1939 will remain a powerful lesson for generations to come.